Hey guys, it's Ben here, and today I'm continuing the Rise and Fall series by looking at the Ty Lawson era in Denver, which I'm going to say is from 2010 to 2015. Ty was actually drafted in 2009, but he really didn't play his rookie year, so I'm going to pick it up at 2010 and go throughout 2015, which was his last season with the team. This is part of the Rise and Fall series. If you haven't checked out the previous videos and you're interested, uh, this is part of the playlist, so you can check out the playlist on my channel. And if you're curious what it's about me highlighting various NBA contenders who rose to be a perennial contender, plateaued at a certain point in their run, and then ultimately started declining. And I basically go through and try to account for why they were successful, and then ultimately why they ended up failing at the end, or not even failing, but just falling off the chart of the playoff contenders or just being relevant. Um, so yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So the first season I want to look at here is 2010 to 11. If you, As you see here on the top left, I will have the team's record, their seed that year, their playoff result, their offense and defensive rankings, and then I will have the individual stats below. Regular season on the left, playoffs on the right. As far as regular season, I've highlighted games played, minutes played per game, field goal attempts, and uh, percentage. Same with 3 pointers and free throws, and then rebounds per game, assists per game, steals, blocks, and points per game. So this first season is the one in which they traded Carmelo Anthony at the deadline, but I still decided to include it. I left off Carmelo's stats and Chauncey Billups' stats because I feel like since they weren't part of the team down the stretch, they're kind of irrelevant to the result at the very end of the season. So this team went up against the Thunder in the first round, and really the Thunder were just a much more stacked team as far as having the big three that we all know of Harden, Westbrook, and Durant, and Ibaka also. And they had acquired Perkins at this time, and really just nobody on Denver could match that OKC powerhouse as far as all that talent. And now Denver had a really good collection of role players between Aflalo, Ray Felton, Gallinari, Wilson Chandler. They had acquired all those guys at the deadline besides Aflalo that I just listed. They still had Nene. Ty Lawson actually started starting this year and did pretty well. And then you still had the leftover guys from the mellow era, I'll call it, between like Kenyon Martin and J.R. Smith. And then good role player in Al Harrington, and Chris Anderson had missed most of the year, but he was still around. But as you can see, a lot of guys scoring in double digits, but all of them below 15 points per game, and that to me really displayed that although they had a lot of guys scoring, they didn't really have that like one bona fide option that they could go to down the stretch and rely on. And if you look at their playoffs, as far as people who played really well or really bad, Ray Felton pictured above as well. He played pretty bad in the playoffs with his efficiency falling off quite a bit, down to 36% from the field. Besides him, Aaron Aflalo, who was shooting nearly 50% from the field, was down to 35%, which is putrid for 11 shots a game, which was their highest shot taker of anyone on the team. And then Wilson Chandler too, less than 28% from the field, down from 13 points per game to less than 5. That was atrocious. So I think the problem that they ran into this season was that they had a lot of really good role players and starters, but not necessarily any one like go-to guy that they could consistently rely on down the stretch or like in the crunch time to be the playmaker, to be the go-to option. Going into the next season, which was the lockout, if you adjust their record to a regular season, it's 47 and 35. They had the third best offense in the league, but a pretty mediocre defense. And they basically had kept most of the same core here. They had brought in Andre Miller as a role player. Kenneth Faried had been drafted this year, and they had lost some guys like Kenyon Martin, Chris Anderson, J.R. Smith, who had been kind of part of that Carmelo Anthony era. But they had a lot of the key guys. And the big factor this season that inhibited them a bit was that Wilson Chandler, one of the better players they acquired for Carmelo Anthony, was injured all but like 7 games. So I actually left his stats for the season off just because they were kind of irrelevant. But yeah, so they were missing one of their premier guys, and so you see Aflalo and Ty Lawson, their scoring took a bit of a jump because they were missing him. Also, you'll notice that Gallinari missed like 20 games, and they traded away Nene at midseason for uh, JaVale McGee to play center for them. And they did decent, but again, they kind of faced a more of a powerhouse threat in the first round than they had talent for. They faced the Lakers with Kobe, Gasol, Bynum, Ron Artest, and really they just don't have the star power to match up with them. Um, Lawson played fine. Aflalo played okay, but pretty poorly actually, as far as his efficiency dropping quite a bit. And Gallinari's efficiency dropped a good amount too, down to 36% from the field. And Al Harrington's as well, down to 32% from the field, which is pretty poor. And really, they just were kind of again outgunned. Like they had a lot of really good role players and starters, but no stars, which hurts you come the playoff crunch time when you just need that one guy to like create a shot for himself. And Ty Lawson's issue with being that guy was that he's so short that if you put like a Kobe on him, Kobe's 7 inches taller, but basically can keep up with him fine. So you're gonna struggle to have him getting his own shot off. Same deal with Aflalo and Gallinari. They've got the height, but they're more of spot up shooters rather than shot creators, so they can't do much of that. So they didn't really have that one like 6'6" guy who could create his own shot on this team. Going into the next year, they participated in the Dwight Howard trade and basically traded Aaron Aflalo for Andre Iguodala. It had some really good results for them in that they had the third best record in the West this year. George Karl won Coach of the Year. They had the fifth best offense and the 11th ranked defense, which is a big jump up, and you could largely attribute that to increased playing time from Kenneth Faried. They got Wilson Chandler back for only half the season, but still it helped having him back. Corey Brewer came in, and also then Iguodala is a big defensive upgrade over Aflalo. So between Iguodala, Faried, Chandler, and Corey Brewer, those are all pretty good defenders uh, who kind of changed the tide for this team. And again, pretty balanced scoring. Lawson and Gallinari, the main guys as as far as scoring, and then role player scoring from Faried, Iguodala, Chandler, and Brewer. Going into the playoffs, they faced Golden State in the first round, and really, I feel like again they're running into this issue of just not having that one guy that they can kind of give the ball to and say, "Hey, create the offense for us." Because by this point, Iguodala was sort of past that point in his career where he was going to be effective at doing that. Uh, I think the last time he scored over like 16 points per game was like 2008 or 9 at this point, and this is about 4 years later. He did actually jump up his scoring average quite a bit in the playoffs, but that's really because they were lacking Danilo Gallinari in this series, which actually really hurt them quite a bit. And besides that, if you just look at their stats overall, Corey Brewer played really bad in the playoffs as far as efficiency. Same with Wilson Chandler. Same with Costa Koufis. Um, yeah, they just didn't have that one consistent scoring option, and so a lot of the role players slash low level starters like Koufis or Brewer, they just dropped off a cliff because of their inconsistencies kind of caught up with them. The next season, Andre Iguodala left for Golden State, and they also they didn't have Danilo Gallinari for the whole season because they lost him to injury from that previous season. And basically, to counteract the loss of Gallinari and Iguodala leaving in free agency, they signed Randy Foye, and that was basically it. They also signed like Nate Robinson and Aaron Brooks as backup point guards in case Lawson got injured, but that was kind of overkill to me. They didn't really need that many point guards on the roster. Um, Aaron Brooks only played a little under 30 games, as you can see as well, so that wasn't a huge factor. And Nate Robinson also only played like half the season, but yeah, basically they replaced their best scorer and their best overall player with Randy Foye, which is always going to be problematic. So yeah, this team didn't make the playoffs. Their offense was average. Their defense was mediocre without Iguodala there to anchor it, and also by this point Corey Brewer had left as well. Um, they had 20 games missed by Lawson, 20 games missed by Wilson Chandler. Obviously, the whole season missed by Gallinari, over 50 games missed by Brooks, half the season missed by Nate Robinson, over half the season missed by Andre Miller. So, you know, they had a lot of their guys like Fareed and um, Lawson and Chandler there for most of the year, but missing Gallinari for the whole year and losing Iguodala really just sunk this season for them because they weren't really ready for that. So yeah, this was a bit of a just scratch it season, and let's come back next year. And when they did come back next year with the again reacquired Aaron Aflalo, they still weren't really able to make it work. And the reason being, during this season, they had a mix of these kind of different eras. Like they were bringing in new guys like Will Barton. They had brought Aflalo back. They had brought in Jameer Nelson. They had brought in Yusuf Nurkic and Gary Harris, and you kind of had this mix of like role players and starters, and you didn't really know like who to give the minutes to. As you can see, they actually had 6 different guys in double figures, but nobody really scoring that much again. Like Ty Lawson, the leading scorer, at only 15 points per game. And to me, the real problem with this team was a weird issue that a lot of these other Denver iterations have had, which is just you don't really know who to defer to and who should really be getting the most shots per game. Like, they didn't really have that guy who was capable of scoring like 22 points per game. Because Gallinari hadn't really showed he was capable of that yet. This year, he only scored 12 points a game. Same with a guy like Wilson Chandler or Aflalo. And Ty Lawson was basically just too small to be able to consistently be getting up that many shots against, even if a defender was like 6'2", that was 3 inches they had on Ty Lawson. So he really struggled to get shots up against basically all but probably 1 or 2 point guards being taller than him in the league, probably besides like Nate Robinson and JJ Barea. And so again, they struggled and they failed to make the playoffs, and then this era was kind of over. They got rid of Aflalo after this, Ty Lawson, Timothy Mozgov they traded away, Gallinari the next couple seasons continued to struggle with injuries. Randy Foye left, I think Jameer Nelson and J.J. Hickson left, Nate Robinson left, so they kind of restarted with a core of like Gary Harris and Will Barton after this, and then they had also, I believe, drafted the Joker who came over after this season and started playing for them. So if I had to sum up overall why this team rose, it was because they had a really deep roster and a lot of really good players. And if I had to explain why they never got over the hump, it would be because like when it came down to it in the playoffs, they never had that guy that they could defer to and be like, hey, create offense for us. Get us a shot in a tough, difficult situation. Iguodala wasn't a good enough shooter to be that the season that he was there. Ty Lawson was always too small and just a little bit too inefficient. And then they had other guys like, say, Corey Brewer, not a good enough shooter. Fareed didn't really have much of an offensive game besides dunking, alley-oops. And Aflalo, spot-up shooter. Wilson Chandler, spot-up shooter. Danilo Gallinari, at this point, spot-up shooter. So they just didn't have a guy who was basically all around, which is what they had in Melo, which is what they traded away. And then ultimately why they started failing is that they had a few injury problems, and then they just didn't really know what they wanted this roster to be. They should have traded some of these supporting pieces for a bona fide star, but they never really did that. They just wrote it out and said, like, instead of having 1 star and 5 role players, we'll just have like 9 or 10 really good role players, which is kind of playing in the middle and never really being decisive with where they wanted to take the franchise. And there you go, guys. That's the story of the post-Melo Nuggets led by Ty Lawson. If you enjoyed the video, check out the others in the series, and I hope to see you next time.